When finishing the trilogy of The Hunger Games, one's thoughts on Katniss and Snow are pretty clear. President Snow is the venomous, narcissistic psychopath, and Katniss is the tragic survivalist hero, right? Well, yes, those are accurate views of the two. However, with the release of the prequel book The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, a book which focuses on a young Coriolanus Snow, his backstory, his contribution to the Hunger Games, and a glimpse of how he rose to power, we find that the cunning young soon-to-be president shares quite a few similarities with our young Miss Everdeen. Snow even alludes to these similarities in the final book Mockingjay, when the two are talking in his rose garden after the rebels seize the capital. But how could these two share anything in common? Look how different they turned out to be. Yes, they did end up quite different from one another, but have you ever heard of the phrase nature versus nurture? Because that concept is going to play a vital role in my compare and contrast of these two protagonists from the Hunger Games series. Hey y'all, I'm the Geek Apprentice and welcome to the 6th annual Hunger Games month. Normally just the month of November, but this year I started early in October, so feel free after watching this video to go check out the ones I've already released. When you think of characters who have personality similarities to Katniss Everdeen, whom do you think of? Gale? Haymitch? Certainly not Snow, at least not very high on the list. However, in my recent reread of the prequel book, I found myself constantly comparing the two. And while of course there are massive differences, I found that both experienced similar upbringings. In fact, it seemed though they have very different natures, the way they were nurtured was comparable. But due to the former, they became quite different while having some shared experiences. But now I'm beginning to ramble, so let's move on. Before I get to my compare and contrast, I do believe that it might be important for me to clarify what I mean by certain terms that I'll be using in and out and more so in my final analysis. I am neither a linguist nor a psychologist, though I adored my psychology classes in college. But nonetheless, I do think it's important to clarify what I mean when I use these terms so you have a better understanding where I'm coming from when I use them. Though, like I said, I'm not going to be using them a ton, but they are foreign enough concepts, or at least misunderstood concepts, that I want to clarify them nonetheless. Nature is how someone is regardless of influence from others. For example, though I was raised in a family that put a high value on exquisite academia and little on the arts, it was not in my nature to follow that path to something like a business degree. It is, however, in my nature to be pretty artsy to the point of making it my career, despite that not being the logical choice by some standards. Nurture, however, is how someone is raised, intentionally or not, and influenced based on family dynamics, life circumstances, etc. And of course, that can manifest differently later in someone's life based on their nature. As an example, though it wasn't my nature to be artsy, the way I was nurtured led me to think that if I didn't do well in school, that was a direct reflection on my overall intelligence and thus somehow my value in society. And I'm making it sound worse than it actually was, but you get the idea. Alright, so I have explored 4 categories when it comes to comparing Snow and Katniss: family, childhood, teens, and survival. Each of these are areas where I've seen some interesting overlaps between these two titular characters. So without further ado, let's finally get to it. The respective families of Snow and Katniss are similar in many regards. To begin, both protagonists lost their parents at a young age. Yes, Katniss's mother didn't die, but she did lose her for quite some time, and honestly, never truly got her back, making both Snow and Katniss, in a way, orphans. Each character also had a tight bond with one parent and strained with the other. You might argue that doesn't mean much, as it was different for each one, Katniss being close to her father, but Snow not being close to his father. However, I would push back and say it's actually the reverse. The fact that they were incredibly close to the parent of the opposite sex and strained with the parent of the same sex, I think is telling. Men and women have some key differences between one another, and that certainly shows up in parenting, whether as a mother or as a father. So even if there's nothing more to that, it's nonetheless comparable. One more note, they both had a little sister. Snow never met his, as she died shortly after birth, along with his mother, but they both lost a little sister regardless. It just didn't have the same impact. The big difference would be their positioning in all of this. Snow was taken care of, while Katniss was the one taking care of others. Though Snow had a little sister, he never had to fill the big sibling role as she died so soon. On the other hand, Katniss not only had to fill those shoes, but also the shoes of parent. Who did it in Snow's family? His cousin Tigris. This doesn't mean his life was all fine and dandy, but it does mean that he was more so in the position Prim was than Katniss, despite all of the familial similarities. There's something different about children who had to provide from a young age. Snow didn't have to do that. Katniss did, so there's a big family area where they differ. Both Snow and Katniss struggled in their childhood, no doubt about it. Starvation, death, disease, it all ran rampant for both of them. They both witnessed war and brutal violence. Both experienced starvation, poverty, and the constant feeling of fighting for your life. But sticking with just childhood, so before Katniss's father died and around the time that Snow lost his parents, this was also insanely different in their direct nurturing. Katniss had a loving home. Her dad sang and taught her how to provide and hunt and played with her. She saw a beautiful marriage between her parents. She loved her little sister. She had a foundation of what love is, even if circumstance would cause her to go hard for a bit. Snow, on the other hand, well, everything was about reputation and keeping up the family name. Pleasing his late father, listening to his grandmom, both weighed heavily on his day-to-day. Sure, he had a lovely relationship with his mother, but we don't know much else about that. Not to mention, Tigris seemed like a good soul all the way through, and certainly was a great example of love to him that just didn't take, I guess. So you can't say he didn't have some of his crazy come naturally, but certainly his upbringing didn't help to quell what was already there. Their teen years seem to be what we know the most about. This is obvious as this is when the books, which they narrate, are written. Despite experiencing similar tragedies and hardships in childhood, their different personalities truly emerge in adolescence. But before delving into that, I still wish to look at the similarities first. Both Snow and Katniss are still actively struggling to have enough to sustain their lives and are having to work around the clock to keep themselves alive. Katniss provides through tactful efforts like hunting and trading, while Coriolanus provides through cunning efforts, charming and manipulating people and situations around him to keep himself fed and clothed. Still yet, both are coming face to face with terribly anxious situations when we first meet them in their respective books. Reaping Day. For Katniss, this means dozens of slips in the jar with her name on it, dozens of pieces of paper that could send her to the games, to her death, and of course, the death of her family, as Gale couldn't provide forever. Not only her, but her best friend Gale has even more slips. Worst yet, her little sister Prim, though it's only her first slip, is now of age to be entered into the reaping as well. In Snow's time, he's anxious for Reaping Day as he will be a mentor, a first-time thing for the games. And if his tribute wins, it means he can go to university for free, win tons of other accolades, and of course bring shining glory back to the family name of Snow. If not, well, he might as well die then and there. Both have their worst fears realized. Katniss' sister is reaped and she volunteers in her place. She's now in the games. Snow is given the worst of all tributes, the District 12 female, and she seems crazy to boot. Both teens are forced to make the best of a bad situation. Snow by using his well-developed charm and wit to give his tribute the best chance he can. Lucky for him, people are fascinated by her. And Katniss by proving her worth and putting all those years of developing survival skills to good use to survive the battle royale that is the Hunger Games. So situationally, their teens are incredibly similar, but that's where it ends. Though they both get what they want, winning the Hunger Games, the how and why are vastly different. For the how, yes, they both use their individual survival techniques, but that in and of itself is different. Snow with his manipulation, and Katniss with her hunting skills. And for the why, one is self-preservation, and one is preservation of other. Not hard to guess which is which, is it? Yes, Katniss does protect herself, but only because she protected Prim first, and continues to do so as she needs to get home to continue providing. Yes, Snow protects Lucy Gray, if you will, but only because he wants to protect himself, feelings aside. So as previously stated, their teens highlight some key differences in their natures that I'll talk about further coming up. This final category is arguably where the similarities of these two protagonists are the most similar. They're both survivors. Survivors of war, starvation, poverty, injustices. They both had to tough it out through some horrible times. And while I mentioned they both survived by using different means, they both came from the same core: intelligence. This is why conversations between them are so captivating. They understand each other more than first glance would tell you. They both understand how to play the mind games of life and are incredibly smart in seeing the other's moves and counter moves. How? Because they've been playing these games since their early childhood. They're experts. Snow may not have any practical skills in the wilderness, but boy can he charm and manipulate both people and situations. Katniss may be awkward when she speaks to others, and she can't charm or lie to people the way Snow can, but that doesn't mean she can't read them. Her survival skills were more tactile, but just as important as her opponents. So, the final analysis. How do they compare? How similar are they? What is their biggest difference? In their experiences, the pair line up pretty evenly. While the nuances and details are varying, both suffered a traumatic childhood and teen life riddled with anxiety, fear, and a need for survivalist mentality. They both endured starvation and poverty, judgment from their position in life, one for simply being district scum and therefore the pawn of the government, both Snow and Coins, and the other for how much power he had or didn't have and living up to the family name. Both experienced resilience well beyond their age, in part by circumstance, but also by their personality. Even though they both had moments of despair and not wanting to carry on, their passion for their respective goals were strong enough to push them forward, even if their goals were different. Beyond just surviving, I mean. And even then, at the end, both of them had one goal that overlapped pretty largely: a better Panem. But that is where the similarities stop. I alluded to this earlier, but you find that one is very self-oriented while the other is other-oriented. Why did Snow persevere? For his own gain, to have power and glory to his name. Katniss? To protect her sister, her family, and many others around her, simply because it was the right thing to do. What about their end goal of a better Panem? Well, for Katniss, she humbly didn't think she could do it, nor did she really want to. She did what she could because it was the right thing to do. She didn't want honor and glory, she wanted security, safety, and freedom. She had her teen moments of rebellion, but it was still because people's lives were at stake. The freedom of many were at stake. Snow? It was about control, not freedom. District citizens were still scum to him. You can argue he was previously influenced this way by people like Dr. Gall, but then when he was living in it through and through and seemingly falling for one of them, it meant nothing in the end. He lived among them and still thought them lesser. Unlike Katniss, who gained sympathy and understanding for her supposed enemy. In the end, Snow's goal of helping Panem was for him to be in control and have all the power. And finally, take a look at them when they are at their most vulnerable and you find their biggest difference: their hearts. When Katniss is beaten down and hurting and in the middle of chaos, what does she do? She wants to help. Look at when they bombed the hospital in District 8. Her heart was for the people. As for Snow, when he's stripped down, you see his true colors past the facade of charm he puts up on the daily. He's egotistical, maniacal, terrifying, and raging in anger, just like we saw in his final encounter with Lucy Gray. Sure, it took him a while to get there, but it was always there nonetheless. So while the two share so much in common, and that's why they get each other better than one would think, their hearts are vehemently different. And it shows so clearly when they're at their lowest, just as we all show our true colors in such a state. Thank you all so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please consider giving it a thumbs up and joining the Geekdom by hitting that subscribe button. Also, be sure to comment down below your thoughts on these two characters, what things you think they're similar on and what things you think they're different on. I know many are going to disagree with me in some regard. There are a lot of Snow fans out there who think that the prequel showed just what a good person he was. I beg to differ. He was already a bad guy, but having a bad situation made him that much worse. That's just my opinion. If you'd like to consider helping support the channel in a different type of way, then maybe consider going to patreon.com/TheGeekApprentice and support there. Or you can also go to my merch store where I have exclusive merch for this month only if you want to check it out. That's at Teespring, but that link is in the description below. Speaking of financial support, thank you so much to my patrons, every single one of you, and especially those who support in my highest tier, the Hylian Knight tier, Joking Batman, Geek Mom, Lorulian Sheep, and McToppler. And thank you to our two newest patrons that have joined recently, Batgamer and Sstefan. Y'all are all so amazing, I cannot thank y'all enough. But anyway, that's all for today. Thank you for watching, and may the odds be ever in your favor.